And then came the death of the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. And strange things began to happen. And the Khilafah was taken out of Medina. You know, the little oasis in the desert, agricultural town, having no significance except for goats and sheep and so on. So let's take it to Damascus, a more civilized city, a more famous city. And so the Khilafah went to Damascus. It went to Baghdad. It went to Cairo. It even went out of the Arab world into a new part of the Arab world, Andalusia, but still Arab. And then it went mysteriously so. And this history is still to be written by a historian who perhaps is not yet born, or maybe is now a baby, but who will one day write this history. The Dajjal, the false Messiah, was at work when the Khilafah was taken. The Khilafah was taken out of the Arab world, taken to a people who did not have credentials to rule over the heartland of Islam. The Ottoman Empire had many things that you don't know about it, and we'll have to speak about it when we give the lecture, inshallah, I think next week, on the conquest of Constantinople in Akhirul Zaman. I think that lecture is next week, inshallah. About 100 years ago, in another 10 years from now, it will be 100 years since the transfer of power took place in Mecca. After the Ottoman Turkish rule over Mecca and Medina, which lasted for almost 400 years, an Arab Spring came to the Arab world. And as usual, it was a European engineered Arab Spring, a Zionist engineered Arab Spring, which injected the virus of Arab nationalism, in consequence of which Sharif al-Hussein, the Ottoman appointed Sharif of Mecca, rebelled against the Ottoman rule in 1916. And then in 1924, when Mustafa Kemal, I don't call him Ataturk, I call him Mustafa Kemal, when Mustafa Kemal, acting in accordance with the wishes of his Zionist masters, announced the abolition of the Khilafah. An attempt was made to bring the Khilafah back to the Arab world, where it should have been, in the heartland of Islam. The Khilafah started in Medina. So Sharif al-Hussein, 7 days, or was it 4 days, either 4 or 7 days, after the Turkish Grand National Assembly announced the abolition of the Khilafah, Sharif al-Hussein, who is probably the great-grandfather of the present king of Jordan, he declared, I am the Khalifa. I am the Khalifa. I claim the Khilafah in Mecca. Well, this was a positive move. He abolishes the Khilafah, and we say, no, you should not do that. The Khilafah is an essential institution of Islam. And so he attempts to preserve the Khilafah by establishing the Khilafah once again in the Hijaz, in Mecca. But that was not in accordance with British and Zionist planning. You see, they had first of all made an agreement with him at the time when he rebelled against the Ottomans. Lawrence of Arabia had gone into Arabia with a checkbook, sterling pounds, and paid him 7 million sterling pounds to come on our side. So if you are a client of the Anglo-American Zionist alliance, Judeo-Christian Zionist alliance, you can't turn against them, double A. So his claiming to be the Khalifa was not pleasing to the British, who then turned to another ally that they had, someone who didn't have the clout that Sharif Hussein had, so he couldn't ask for 7 million pounds. He was in Riyadh. His name was Abdul Aziz ibn Saud. He was known as the Sultan of Najd, and he had to be content with 5,000 sterling pounds a month. And when his people, his armed force, the Ikhwan, not the Ikhwan in Egypt, when they asked him, how could you take the 5,000 pounds a month from the British? Huh? Haram? He said, no, this is jizya. This is jizya. So the British turned to another ally of theirs, who then sent his armed force against Sharif al-Hussein and defeated and conquered Mecca. In fact, they did it without any fight. Mecca surrendered. And that was, in 10 years from now, that will be 100 years since that occurred. And so the regime change took place in Mecca, and 1 year later in Medina. And Mecca and Medina now come under Arab rule. Arab rule. Would the status of Mecca and Medina be restored? Would they come back to center stage? Would the Khilafah be restored? Would Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, who has made an alliance with the Wahhabi movement, and I do not use the term Wahhabi in any pejorative way, no, would they restore the Khilafah? You must be making a joke. Abdul Aziz ibn Saud knows very well that his masters in London would not allow him to do that. If he were to claim the Khilafah, the same thing would happen to him that happened to Sharif al-Hussein. Because the Zionists do not want the Khilafah state to survive. And now we can understand that Dajjal was at work. Dajjal wants to destroy the Khilafah, and his planning takes hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. That's why there's a historian who is going to come, who will write this history one day, but is not yet written, using the tools of analysis out of Ilmu Akhir al-Zaman, Dajjal. We now understand that the Ottoman success in taking over Constantinople and then in building that powerful Ottoman Empire and then taking over much of the Arab world over its control and then taking the Khilafah to Constantinople out of the Arab world for the first time in the history of Islam, in the history of this ummah, the Khilafah is taken out of the Arab world. We understand that this was a preliminary step on the Dajjal's path to eventually demolish the Khilafah. And that Ottoman rule, which lasted for 400 years, was meant to prepare the way for the destruction of the Khilafah. And so when Ibn Saud, Abdulaziz Ibn Saud, and I have a book on this subject, it is entitled The Caliphate, the Hijaz, and the Saudi Wahhabi nation state. Maybe Haji Radwan will translate it into Bahasa, inshallah. We are out of stock of that book. It has to be reprinted. I wrote it 35 years ago when I was a PhD student in Geneva, and I had access to the United Nations Library in Geneva. That's where I got all this information from, which otherwise I could not access because it's destroyed. That book tells the story of how these events took place. Abdulaziz ibn Saud now has control over Mecca and Medina. What is he going to do? In that book that I just mentioned, you'll find the history of how the world of Islam responded to the abolition of the Khilafah, the destruction of the Khilafah by Mustafa Kemal. Jamiatul Azhar in Egypt was the first to respond. And they decided that their response would be a Khilafah conference, Mu'tamarul Khilafah, which they organized to take place in Cairo in 1926. I don't think you were born at that time. But Abdulaziz ibn Saud then decided to sabotage the Cairo conference, because the Cairo conference was organized to restore the Khilafah. To restore the Khilafah. And that bothered the British a lot. So he organized a rival conference in Mecca to sabotage them. And that rival conference in Mecca, also in 1926, but on the occasion of the Hajj, that rival conference saw Mecca once again come to center stage in the affairs of the world of Islam. After so many 100 years, Mecca returns to center stage in that conference which was organized in 1926 in Mecca. He organized that conference because he wanted the world of Islam to accept his rule over the Hijaz. But thank Allah that we had men, scholars of Islam from India, who attended that conference. Like Maulana Muhammad Ali Jawhar rahimahullah. And the Maulana stood up and faced the king to his face and rejected his claim. And when the Indian Islamic scholarship stood up and declared their position, that no, the Hijaz does not belong to you, then the rest of the conference, including the Saudi delegates, could do nothing. And so the effort failed. That was Makkah. The king decided that the conference should take place every year at the time of the Hajj. MashaAllah. What a wonderful suggestion, eh? That the whole of the world of Islam should come together at the time of the Hajj. That the affairs of the world of Islam and the affairs of the world at large may be discussed by the leaders and the scholars. What a wonderful idea by Abdulaziz ibn Saud. But because the conference said to him, no, we don't recognize you, that was it. The conference was never held again in Mecca. So Mecca now begins to recede back again no longer occupying any position of significance. What about Medina? Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam is in Medina. What would Abdul Aziz ibn Saud do about this city? When they failed in their effort to get political recognition, they decided a plan for Medina, that Medina will now become a university town. So they established the Islamic University of Medina. And this university in Medina is now charged with the task, because it's not only a Saudi state, it's a Saudi Wahhabi state. And the Wahhabis have a Protestant version of Islam. Study the Protestant movement in Europe and you'll understand much about the Wahhabi Islam. And this Wahhabi Islam, this Protestant Islam, is now going to be established in Medina in this university. Students are going to come from all over the world. And from Medina, a new version of Islam, which is the authentic Islam. Authentic Islam will now reach out to the world of Islam. And the target that you have to attack and demolish is Sufism, the Sufis. These Sufis are the ones who have destroyed Islam. They brought all kind of shirk and bid'ah and this and that and the other. And we have the task of purifying the faith and restoring the original faith. Oh, but the original faith had a spiritual heart. The original faith had men who could see with the nur of Allah. The original faith had men, you couldn't take them for a ride. No, that was the original faith. اتقوا فراسة المؤمن فإنه ينظر بنور الله. So if you are going to restore the original faith in Medina, you are going to produce those scholars who will be able to see that Saudi Arabia's subservience to an alliance with the Anglo-American Zionist alliance is a betrayal of Islam. A horrendous, monstrously wicked betrayal of Islam. If you are going to produce in this university men who have the purest version of Islam, then there will be people who have eyes with which to see. And they will ask the question, well, how come? You have control of the Hijaz, you have control of Makkah and Medina. Why are you not restoring the Khilafah? At least this much will come out of the university. But Protestant Islam has eyes and yet cannot see. Protestant Islam has ears and yet cannot hear. Protestant Islam has hearts and yet do not understand. Ulaika kal-an'am. They're just like cattle. Don't be annoyed with me for speaking the truth. If you had any integrity, then for the last 70, 80 years, you would have been raising your voice in Mecca and Medina and calling for the restoration of the Khilafah. If you had any integrity, you would have denounced the Saudi regime for their subservience to and the alliance with the wicked, the monstrously wicked Anglo-American Zionist alliance, Judeo-Christian alliance. Allah in the Quran has prohibited Muslim alliance with the Judeo-Christian alliance. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء بعضهم أولياء بعض. Do not take such Jews And do not take such Christians, not all Jews, not all Christians, do not take such Jews and do not take such Christians as your friends and allies, who themselves are friends and allies of each other. The Quran is referring to this Judeo-Christian Anglo-American Zionist alliance. And if you become their allies, as Saudi Arabia has done, as Kuwait has done, as Qatar has done, so many others. وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُم مِّنكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. Whosoever from amongst you turn to them for friendship and alliance, you've lost your Islam. You now belong to them. And Allah does not provide guidance for a people whose trademark is wickedness. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ. And so the university town was dust in your eyes. The claim that this is the pure Islam was dust in your eyes, because it was Protestant Islam all the way in Medina.